Welcome to our continuing series, Prep Talk. I'm the Nomadic Baker. Join me today as we get a little bit salty. Today, in our continuing series, Prep Talk, we will be learning everything you ever wanted to know about sodium chloride, table salt, and maybe a few things that you didn't want to know. Here in my kitchen, I classify salt in 3 different categories: fine salt, coarse salt, and finishing salt. Now, what does that all mean? It means, for a stickler about salt the way I am, it means that these different categories are used for 3 very different things. I use mainly fine sea salt for cooking, which is, as you've seen in previous videos, something very different from baking, but mainly for cooking. So let's go ahead and slide those out of the way. Here in the Nomadic Baker kitchen, we use mostly coarse salt and finishing salt. Let's take a look in this beautiful salt crock. Here, you're going to find on one side traditional kosher salt, and then on this side, gorgeous, sparkling black salt. We'll talk a little bit more about black salt when we talk about finishing salts. Kosher salt, and here we have a stunning salt from France that actually comes wet. And interesting, it stays wet even after you open it. We use this in all of the breads that we bake. Now let's talk a little bit about iodized salt, table salt. This is standard Morton's iodized salt. I never use this in any of my scientific bakes. You run the risk when using iodized salt of having your yeast not completely die, but it can certainly alter how high your leavening and yeast agents will be able to raise the bread that you're baking. Let's talk just a little bit more about why we have iodized salt. Somewhere along the lines of history over the last 100 years, a lot of people have just come to assume that iodine was added to not have salt clump. And while that is certainly true, it does, as it says on the box, free flowing. About 100 years ago, actually a little bit more than 100 years ago, especially in northern parts of the United States, became known as the goiter belt. Now, goiter is an old-fashioned way of talking about thyroid disease. And when you live in a northern climate where there is not a lot of iodine in the soil, you run the risk of having all different types of thyroid problems. One of the most amazing health proxies of the last century was the addition of iodine into sodium chloride. It was placed inside as a chemical formula in salt to help aid northern climates, and rapidly, I mean almost overnight, people who had goiter problems, those people continued with the issues, but people who were younger started having less and less goiter problems. And that is because of the addition of iodine. Now, in third world countries today, salt is still not iodized, and they have a massive problem with thyroid issues. It is such an elegant solution, and on top of that, it is such a cheap solution. So that might have been something you didn't want to know about salt, but there it is. So let's set that aside because, like the fine salt, we won't be using that in any of the bakes. The same goes along for pickling salt. We won't be using any of that in our bake, but it's not that it's not important. It's just the concentration of salt in this is far too high for general baking. So if you are rooting around in your pantry and can't find any kosher salt and you say, I have canning salt, won't work. So let's set that one aside. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with kosher salt and this beautiful coarse salt from France that I said was wet. So when I come back, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the coarse salt that we use in our bakes. This is Diamond Kosher Salt Flakes. This is the gold standard when it comes to putting salt, sodium chloride, into all of your bread recipes. This is lowest on the amount of salinity that you'll be adding into your bakes. Therefore, it's very mild, but it still gets the job done. And this, of course, is high-end wet sandy salt, should I say, from France. I use a combination sometimes of both of these. If I'm making very expensive bread with very expensive flour, I'm going to always go with this salt. And if I am just making bread for my family and not something that I'm going to put out into the universe as it is, I'm going to use this right here. This has been around for a long time, for a very good reason. It is the preferred brand. It has gotten difficult to find, especially since the pandemic and of course during the pandemic, mainly because everybody was at home and everybody wanted to learn how to bake, so everybody started buying up all of the kosher salt that they could find. Back in the day, I was able to get this for about 99 cents a box. You can find this now on Amazon for about $14. Some Jewish grocery stores and some mail order catalogs and online can sometimes have it a little bit cheaper, but a little bit goes a long way, and a big box like this will probably last the average baker about a year. And the beautiful thing about salt is it does not go bad. Of course, if it gets moist, it can clump, but for the most part, if you keep it in a dark, cool, dry place, you can keep this forever. In this kitchen, I go through about a box of this a month, so you can see how it's gotten quite expensive. And let's talk about that. Since it is so expensive, you might say to yourself, well, I don't want to spend $14 on a box of salt. Who did to say, I don't want to spend that much on that kind of salt. What else can I use? A perfectly acceptable substitution would be Morton's Kosher Salt, and you can generally get that for about $2.50 for a half size of this box at really any grocery store. I do find the Morton's Kosher Salt to have a higher salinity. So let's just say you had a recipe that was calling for, say, 25 grams of kosher salt. If I was using the Morton's Kosher Salt, I would most likely decrease that by about a third. Sometimes find it a little bit salty. Okay, let's put that aside and talk just a little bit more about this wet salt. It is virtually interchangeable when it comes to grams and milligrams when you are substituting this in for the Diamond Kosher Salt, so I really don't alter it. We are all set up with our finishing salt. We have a typical black garlic and pink Himalayas salt that you can find really in any international aisle in any grocery store. And this is a specialty, even though it's not labeled, a specialty herbed lava salt from, I think I got this on the big island of Hawaii. I can't wait to try this. This is called Cabernet de Soleil, so that means, wine of the sun. I picked this up on our recent trip to Maui, and I never really seen any wine-infused salt before, so can't wait to see what that tastes like. This is a stunning lemon finishing salt. It's flake salt that has been infused with, I'm going to go ahead and assume it's just lemon zest, maybe a little bit of lemon juice in there. I don't know exactly how they'll do that. I guess I could always just read the label. Salt, turmeric, and lemon aroma. So the yellowish color is going to come from the turmeric. And then Maldon flake salt, just like our kosher salt was the gold standard in coarse salt, this is the gold standard in flake salt. We use this to top bagels. We use this to top all different kinds of breads. We finish baked potatoes with it. It's just ubiquitous, and we use this more than we use table salt in this kitchen, mainly because it's a little bit lighter on the salt side and you can control the flavor much better. And then the same brand, Malden, who makes this plain, also makes a smoked sea salt. So that we would also use as a finishing salt. We would never use that inside of a bake because you run the risk of contaminating any delicate flavor in any of the recipes with that smoked flavor. So you want to be able to control the flavor that you're putting onto. Notice I'm saying onto your baked goods, not into your baked goods. So that's a good way of saying that. This is into, and all of these are onto. So that is just a very long-winded way of telling you what my different classifications of salt in this kitchen are for. When I come back, we'll talk a little bit about the differences in weights and how you might think, wait a minute, salt is salt. Well, yes, salt is sodium chloride, but not all salts weigh the same. So in just a moment, we'll be set up and you'll be able to see exactly what different salts will weigh. Welcome back. We are all set up to weigh our salt. So you're asking yourselves, why do we weigh the salt? Well, let's talk a little bit about this measuring spoon. This is, of course, a standard tablespoon. And when you measure anything with a spoon, you are not only weighing the product that you are scooping out, but also the air, which can change radically based on barometric pressure, weather outside, humidity, all different kinds of things. So here in this kitchen, we weigh everything. Now, I will be using this spoon as a demonstration because we're going to scoop out what would be considered a tablespoon and we're going to weigh it. But to do that, we are going to turn on our scale. And this is set for grams. And just as a refresher for those who don't know about weighing on scales, we want to weigh only what we are going to scoop out into this little cup. But if I put this cup on there, this shows that it weighs 60 grams. So I want to tear that weight out. It's got a handy little tear button on it. And let's start by getting out a level tablespoon of kosher salt. And that weighs 7 grams. All right. Now let's put that back on there and tear that out again. All right, we've teared that weight out. Now let's do a level tablespoon of this gorgeous black salt, which I promised we'd talk about later. 26 grams. That is shocking. So that exact same amount of salt that we measured out kosher, and I'll try to get a little closer to the camera here. Those look identical, but that is almost 20 grams more. So if I were using this black salt in a recipe, I'd want to make sure that I'm not just weighing the density of the air, the barometric pressure, the humidity. So I'm going to scoop that out again and just show you this stunning black salt. I use this very, very sparingly in different bakes. This I picked up just outside of Haleakala on the Isle of Maui when I was there, many, many years ago. Not our most recent one from a previous video that you saw last month, but I've had several bags of this now for quite some time, and as I discussed, it does not go bad. So I use it very sparingly because it is one of the most expensive salts I've ever purchased for this kitchen. And if I do use it, I love to sometimes put it on top of bagels before I bake them. Sometimes I mix a little bit in with everything bagel seasoning, and it just gives an added oomph to whatever it is that I'm baking. So let's weigh something else. So if you remember this kosher salt here, let's just weigh it again. I believe it was, 18 grams. Let's see. So we have 18 grams of that salt. Let's just, for argument's sake, even though we're not going to use this in, let's just go ahead and weigh out a tablespoon of this beautiful yellow salt. I'm going to try not to waste any of it here. 12 grams. So that's a good example of this flake salt is so much lighter and airier than coarse salt, which is exactly why it's called that. Now, let's look and see, just out of curiosity again, see if we can get out a tablespoon. Oh, whoa, look at that. Destroyed it, completely destroyed it. It happens. And then we just take a little pinch and, woo! All right, now we can weigh it. 15 grams. Every time we have measured salt, it is different. So now let's go back and let me see if I can get some of that in there. But if I know that my recipe is going to call for 15 grams of kosher salt, I'm going to put 15 grams in. Let's get that exactly right because I want to show you for scientific research. Here we go. We're at 15 grams. Now, I'm just going to dump that out. Now, tear it out. All right. Now let's do 15 grams of this beautiful black salt. And we're at 15 grams. Okay. So now, I'm going to get really close here. That is 15 grams of kosher salt, and this is 15 grams of the lava salt. Get it evened out there. Now, look at what a difference that is. But you do know now that the salinity in 15 grams of this is going to be virtually equal to the 15 grams of salinity in the black salt. And that is precisely why we weigh all of our ingredients. When we do go to make our sourdough bread, you'll get to learn in great detail in videos exactly what the weighing process is and what all of the different processes are for weighing out flour. We even weigh water. We don't measure really anything with you. Now, you've learned more about salt than you probably ever cared to know, and if you only take one thing with you, it is going to be the importance of Diamond Kosher Salt. Now, I'm not being paid any type of commission by the lovely folks at Diamond, but I couldn't stress the importance enough of this one salt. And if you were to ask me, you can only have one salt in your kitchen for the rest of your life, it would be this salt. And if you said to me, I'm going to let you have 2 different kinds of salts in your kitchen, what would the second one be? I would select Diamond Kosher Salt. And then if you were being really generous and you said to me, okay, I get it, the importance, I'll let you have a third one. Which would that be? I would select Diamond Kosher Salt. I like to always use this analogy. Salt, pepper, and vinegar. Salt and acid. Vinegar and acid. And pepper is a flavoring. So salt will enhance a bake. Vinegar will enhance the taste of whatever you put it in. Pepper will change whatever it is that you put it into. So we don't want to change anything. We don't want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to salt. The wheel is Diamond Kosher Salt. The importance can't be stressed enough. So if you only select one salt for your kitchen and you really want to splurge and buy a large box, that's great. If you do know where you can find this in a smaller box, maybe a half-size box, or if you can just get it in a shaker style, please drop it in the comments below. I've never been able to find it, and I've never been able to find it online. Now, because I worked in commercial kitchens most of my adult life, I only ever bought it in boxes this size and even larger than this. In fact, there were many times when we'd buy this in a gigantic drum. I want to say it was a 25-pound drum. That's how important it was inside the bakery. So that about sums up salt, and just an opening primer, if you will, into how we classify the salt, as we talked about, and how we use the salt, and which salts are the most important. So now that you have this primer, I'll often refer back to this video, especially as we begin baking with all of the ingredients that we've gathered from around the world. I'll refer back to this video so that you can reference the importance of salts and specifically how we use each three classification. I hope this was informative. Most of all, I hope you enjoyed it, and let's just keep salty.